Hello, everyone. Well, I guess a little about me. I work as a naturopath and herbalist and a lecturer in herbal medicine and naturopathic philosophy. And I work in research in natural medicine, and I've looked at ways in which we can combine alternative medicine with Western medicine and kind of bridge those gaps, find different ways to do that. And prior to that, I worked as a garden designer and in horticulture and in landscape design. And that kind of came about because initially I thought I wanted to be an environmental engineer. But back in the early 70s, environmental engineering didn't exist as a profession. So I went into civil engineering thinking I'd figure out how to adapt it somehow. And partway through civil engineering, I found I was working on a herb farm and found that I enjoyed working with plants and the land more than I did with bridges and roads and skyscrapers. And so hence my transition. One of the things I need for that study process was that in my final year of secondary school, I didn't pass English. And that came about because every time I sat down to write an essay, whatever the given topic was, and it didn't matter about what it was, something inside of me would happen and I would turn it into a dissertation about how the way humanity was living wasn't in balance with nature. And I never intended it to start out like that, but that's how it was in. So I failed English and I had to make it up in my first year of engineering at university. And it sort of probably should have showed me something because that hasn't moved. That's kind of always been there, and it's taken lots of different forms through different aspects of my work life. So in my work as landscaping, I've worked with schools, setting up environment groups and revegetation programs and recycling programs. And all of that sort of stuff just naturally evolved. And eventually, and the whole garden design thing was interesting because we inherently, all of us, have reflections of us within nature. And I found that I would sit and talk to a family or someone about their garden or what they wanted. And if I listened, they really told me what they wanted in terms of a design. And I'd put it down on paper and build it for them. And what I was building was a reflection of them. Like in listening to what they wanted, all the qualities and the feel and the style of the garden was a reflection of them. So it was like when I came to build the garden, I'd build an archetypal mirror of who they were. And when those worked, they loved it, but they didn't know why, but they were just looking at themselves. And I never really talked about that much. I would just smile a lot. And eventually felt like moving into just working with plants and people a lot more, not so much the construction stuff. And plant medicine was always there. As a child, I just remembered the names of plants. I kind of knew what they were. So it was like they were old friends coming back to visit. I remember I grew up in a little country town and walking to kindergarten, holding my mother's hand just a couple of feet high, the plants growing through the kind of fences that were like 2 or 3 feet above the ground. I kind of be passing them and feel them and smell them and taste them. And it was like, oh, I remember you. And I knew what their names were and I knew what they smelled like and tasted like. So it was like having plant friends kind of come back to greet me. And so I kind of knew that it was always going to be in that general direction. But this topic is such a wide-ranging one. And I kind of feel like maybe within naturopathy, the fundamental principle of naturopathy is this thing called Vis Medicatrix Naturae, which is called the healing power of nature. And I like to that becomes, and I've taught this for many years as part of naturopathic philosophical principles, that as Belinda has talked about, when we interact with nature and relate with nature, our health improves. There is the chemical components that come from plants that improve our health. And there are thousands of studies now that show that when communities live in close relationship with nature, or when there is green spaces close to communities, every aspect of human health improves. Like Belinda was sharing on her slides, diabetes reduces, cognitive behavioural attitudes change, cardiovascular disease incidences go down. And the closer you are to green spaces, the stronger the effect is. So that if the green spaces are 300 metres away from where you live, the effect is stronger than if they're 1 kilometre or 1.2 kilometres away, or 3 kilometres away. So the intensity of the green space and the frequency that you visit it significantly change your health outcomes. And we could spend days talking about that. There's so much research in that area. It's fascinating. Just really, really simple stuff, like in Chicago and Detroit, after there were lots and lots of people laid off after the car industry died, huge levels of unemployment and kind of social displacement, and crime rates skyrocketed. And so they just started choosing corner blocks of vacant land and putting a couple of trees and some bushes and some grass on there. And almost immediately, crime rates started dropping. Most significantly, violent crime dropped by about 45%. All other crime rates, except car theft, interestingly, didn't drop. But domestic violence dropped, and social cohesion improved. And this was just from having a vacant block of dirt and turning it green. And so the effect of small amounts of green can't be underestimated in terms of its effect on our quality of life. And there are so many reasons for that. I'm not just got 33 things at once. The resonant frequency of the planet is 7.83 hertz, this Schumann frequency. And it's the same resonant frequency as the human being and their brain waves in the lower register of alpha state. So it's a quiet meditative space. So when we go into nature, nature acts like a tuning fork. It resonates at a particular frequency that reminds us of what our natural reset is. So we feel more calm and quiet in nature because we're exposed to a frequency that's operating like a tuning fork. And so when we're quiet and reasonably still and not too busy in our mind, and if we're open and receptive, that frequency just starts changing us. And so it moves us back to what our natural healthy state is inside. The alpha states, or alpha brainwave states, are those brainwaves that we experience after we've done some physical activity or something, and we're done and we stop. And so our mind moves back into that sort of below conscious cognitive state. So it's like where we wait and just be open, and then inspiration arises from within. And those places are where healing and regeneration occur in the body. The body regenerates and heals in those spaces. So it's like when we meditate, we know that when we meditate, the cells in the body regenerate more effectively just from those regenerative processes. That's because of the brainwave states that we move into in alpha state. Nature resonates at that same frequency. So when we spend a bit of time with nature, she's just reminding us of where we're meant to sit naturally in a healthy state. It's one of the fundamental principles of natural healing is that the body is always attempting to heal itself. And if we stop doing the things that get in the way of that, like the obstructions to cure, the body will heal naturally. And so when we moved into nature, we become exposed to that resonant frequency that reminds us of what our body wants to do of its own accord. So it just wants to heal anyway. And we just remove the obstruction. When we get busy in our mind and all that kind of stuff, it's sort of that starts to become an interference. When we drink lots of coffee, that becomes an interference. When we drink alcohol, when we're exposed to lots of electromagnetic radiation, that becomes an interference. And it's interesting that in built-up places and around cities and things like that, that you can't read that 7.8 gigahertz frequency. So we don't get the same experience of a frequency resonance for the body to heal when we're in built-up, busy kind of urban environments. But that when you just create a small spot of green, you start generating that level of nature starts generating through it. And people can feel it. And their bodies, their health responds as a result of that. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. And I kind of like, this is kind of like a little bit more of an esoteric one, or a less scientifically proven one. But we have this body that we have, this vehicle that we inhabit, she's made up of ingredients of the planet. It's like the planet gives us atoms and molecules that are part of her. So literally the planet Gaia is our mother, because she builds our body for us. All the molecules inside of us come from her. And when we depart and die, we leave the body, all of our molecules go back to the place that they came. That's our mother. So inherently, our planet is our mother from that perspective. And we kind of forget that. And it's like that forgetting creates a separation from our own kind of one of our own source connections. You know, we have many, many source connections, but the planet is a source connection. We know that when we consciously ground, that all of our electromagnetic frequencies change. Our meridians open, our cortisol level goes down. Just by consciously, energetically grounding, like Patty started today's session with a little grounding exercise, and it was quietening and calming. And that's because just consciously grounding changes all of our body's repair mechanisms. Cortisol going down is one. Circulation improves, oxygenation improves. Lots and lots of different mechanisms. I moved my clinic home because it's in the bush a bit, and I grow a lot of herbs around in the garden. So I make my own medicines from the plants that are in the garden. So my clinic is like a laboratory, actually. It's more like a laboratory because I manufacture stuff. But sometimes people come in and they're not well, and it doesn't matter what medicine I'm going to give them. There are too many things going on inside of them that is resisting that healing process. And often the most useful therapeutic thing that we can do is just, it's like I'll say, you know, look, come for a little walk, and we'll walk outside into the garden. Just stand on the lawn and just kind of take a few deep breaths and look around, because it's surrounded by big tall trees. You can hear the wind, all kinds of medicinal plants, but it's really just the quality of nature. And just spending a few minutes, just quietly acknowledging and being conscious of what's around us changes the disturbances inside the body enough so that their own healing mechanisms can start to work again. It's like that our own innate vital force, or prana, or chi, or whatever you like to call it. It's like they've got lots and lots of names, but those energies always want to help the body return to homeostasis or return to harmony. So as a human organism, we are always in that process of attempting to return to harmony or to homeostasis. And it's kind of like, I feel like all of my work as a naturopath and as a lecturer is about restoring things to harmony. But that's what we're all doing as humanity within ourselves. We're learning how to restore to a place of harmony within ourselves, so that we're not in conflict with our true nature, you know, or we're not in conflict with all that is that wants to come through and manifest in the inside of us. Because we can get caught up in so many of the external stuff that starts to create disharmony or dis-ease. And so when we kind of like come back to what helps us to remind us of our own nature, then the stuff that we're doing that's creating that sense of dis-ease or disharmony starts to dissipate. So our own healing mechanisms start to occur. So we go for a walk in nature, we sit quietly in nature, we relate with nature, and nature starts to remind us of stuff about how we're meant to be. And so our own innate healing mechanisms start to occur. And the thing about that is that we're not separate from nature, like we kind of inherently know and feel this. There are so many reflections of it all around. It's like current research shows us, it's one of the areas I've worked with a number of hospitals about the human microbiome, all the bacteria inside of us. And, for every one human cell, there's more than 10 bacteria cells. So in many ways, we're just a host for bacteria colonies. And in terms of evolution, we've co-evolved together to host bacteria. And that we depend on them for our survival, like the bacteria depend on us for our survival. So in that sense, we're a part of nature. But also, for us to be healthy, those colonies need to be really healthy. There need to be the right varieties of bacteria. When we go and dig in the garden, put our hands in the dirt, we inoculate ourselves with probiotics and with different bacteria that we don't get any other way, that get into our system and start to change the balance or the imbalance in our own interior bacteria, imbalances of bacteria. Like if we eat junk food and sugars and refined carbohydrates, we feed the wrong type of colonies, so our bacterial colonies change. If we go back and put our hands in the dirt, we literally change our bacteria colonies, along with changing our food. But we change our bacteria just by doing a bit of gardening and relating with nature. We start to relate and listen to plants. I mean, for me, plants talk to me. They tell me what they're going to do. It's like we can have sitting quiet conversations and start to learn about nature and have experiences of nature that help us feel connected to a greater whole. Because it's often sometimes what creates that sense of disease or disharmony or illness is this sense of feeling of separation. And when we move into nature, we start to have experiences of not being separate, that we are part of. Going back to the whole bacteria thing, what makes healthy soil to grow healthy herbs and healthy vegetables? What essentially that I find that I'm doing a lot of the time is feeding bacteria colonies, and that the health and the whole composting process in creating healthy compost is this very much the same process as creating an internally healthy microbiome inside a human body. It's making compost and helping someone get healthy are the same thing. The compost helps the soil get healthy. The microbiome helps the human get healthy, but they're the same thing. And I just see so many reflections of that as within, so without, with the human and the planet all the time. And that the imbalance in the human often relates to an imbalance in the planet. And that we can start to correct those imbalances by broadening our experience of our relationship with the planet. And as we do that, it helps to overcome that sense of separation of human and nature, that we start to, we experience that we aren't separate from it. And that once we start to feel a stronger connected sense of oneness, we have a stronger sense of belonging. That stronger sense of belonging changes our emotional state. It changes how connected we feel to community, to the planet. And so it changes what we do and our lifestyle choices and our thought patterns and our behaviors. They kind of all ripple out. Often when someone comes to see me, and they might be someone who's kind of like a typical type A personality, very busy, no time to go and kind of like cut a tree, talking about kind of thing. And besides which, I've got a busy job and I have to earn money to pay the mortgage. And when I get home, I've got kids that need attending to. And my wife's stressed because she's been with them all day, so I've got to give her a break. And so there is no time to do any of that kind of airy-fairy stuff. And so I kind of find out something and just find one little thing. And it might be, oh, you drive past that park on the way home. Stop, get out, go for a walk for 5 minutes and hang out under a tree or lie on the ground, just feel your heart on the grass under a tree, feel your heart connect to the planet and listen to what the planet's reflecting through your heart. And just something like that, and it might take 5 or 10 minutes twice a week, will start to change how they feel about their life. And it will start to change what they feel is possible because their priorities change. So although they still have a busy job and children who need looking after and a relationship to maintain, and wanting to contribute to all of those things, just relating with nature just for short periods of time helps them see that there are different ways that they can do these sorts of things. So it's like it puts a little wedge into the pie of how that person sees their life, and then it starts to wedge it open for something else to be injected in there that creates the opportunity for an experience that's maybe a little bit more in harmony with not only the wife and kids, but with life and nature themselves. So it's like those experiences of just taking a little bit of time out to be with nature can have profound changes on our belief systems, our psychology, what we feel is possible, and what's meaningful to us as well. Because once you've had that once or twice or a few times, you know that you feel different. You know that healing can start to occur on the inside. Like nature provides assistance from that on the outside, but it's not really the outside. But also our internal dynamics also resonate with that, and they start working as well. And so the two start working together. So we start to heal and become more whole, in a sense that we become less separate from ourselves and less separate from our environment. As that starts to happen, we often find that all kinds of physical ailments start to resolve of their own accord, because the cause wasn't a physical ailment in the first place. The cause was a disconnection from a part of themselves that they needed to reconnect to. And it starts to manifest as a physical ailment. So it wasn't, the physical ailment is not the cause of anything. It's more the symptom of an end of a long chain of events. So that relationship with nature, just from a health perspective, it opens all kinds of opportunities and doors for healing, but then not become healing just on a physical way, but become healing in that they help us connect to other parts of us more strongly. As a soul, as a spirit, they start to change our experience of relationship with community and how we relate to others. That kind of thing. I've got stacks and stacks of stats and figures about how nature changes health, individuals and societies and communities, but I don't think that it's kind of relevant to sit here and read those out at the moment. That's probably not the point right now. I think more it's kind of that sense of knowing that our relationship with nature can be really, really simple. It's often just taking a few moments out of, so that it's not separate from the rest of our life. But we can kind of like take a few moments to experience it. We find that it resonates with something very, very deep inside of us. It helps remind us of who we are in our heart and at our core. And so that as we strengthen that, nature can be a wonderful reminder to strengthen it. And, then if we have a busy day, we can still tap into it, even if we can't get out into the bush. But that getting out into the bush is great. I'm often told not to go, which is often Yeah. Does that make sense? It's like there is no separation between us and nature. We are a part of nature. And, we have the obvious example of it is that our physical bodies are built of it. I mean, the body that we inhabit is Mother Earth. She's lent us this vehicle, these ingredients, in which our soul to land and connect with spirit, to get around and have experience, to grow and evolve. So our relationship with nature is very, very real and tangible. And we are part of Gaia's microbiome. We are part of the microbiome getting around on the surface of the planet. Just like we have microbiome on our skin, in our mouth, in our gut. We're the same thing. We're literally the same thing. Sometimes different colonies of microbiomes can go out of balance. Disturbances can occur. And that may be occurring with humanity at the moment in all kinds of different ways. And part of that I ponder on that a lot. And part of it comes back to that thing that I used to get when I was a kid that caused me to write English essays about humanity being out of balance. Because when we look at indigenous cultures from around the globe, they all understood and recognized that nature, they were inherently reliant upon nature. That nature provided sun, water, the earth, food, clothing, shelter, but also that Mother Earth and Father Sun were spiritual guidance. And so there was a sense of sacredness associated with that, and a profound sense of gratitude for all that was provided there. And all indigenous cultures have that sense of sacredness and gratitude about nature. And part of the imbalance that Western societies have is that disconnection from that sense of acknowledgement of sacredness and disconnection to nature. So when we do, acknowledgement of country, we feel something important. And we can live that as an experience all the time, just with every step that we walk on the ground, consciously acknowledging and recognizing that we're part of the planet. Thank you for all that you provide, to provide the experience to be here, to live and evolve and have experience. And, Western cultures maybe have lost that to some degree because indigenous cultures have lived in the same place usually for very, very long periods of time. And so they learnt different ways about how to acknowledge and work with the environment that they had so that it supported them. So, because, the Aboriginal people, when people first came to the Australian continent was very different. And so through different agricultural practice or through different living lifestyle practices, it changed the nature of vegetation on the Australian continent. And the Aboriginal people learnt that they need how to respect what was here, and because it was different from where they'd come from. And that's Indigenous cultures have found that all through the planet. We don't necessarily get it right first time, and nature responds saying, "Hey, things are going wrong," and so hopefully we wake up and listen and change and respect the environment and change our practices. That's happened everywhere. If you look at paleontology and all kinds of forms of historical evolutionary, cultural evolution, we see those examples everywhere. So humanity is in a bit of a stage of that, but humanity, there's so much of us now, and our tools have become so much more destructive that we've lost that sense of connection, of reverence and appreciation for what nature provides. And so we don't respond in kind. When you spend time in nature, and Belinda will know this well, and you listen and feel how nature makes us feel and move to places where sacredness still exists in nature, it reminds us of what's sacred inside of us and the qualities of reverence and sacredness as a spiritual experience. And when we have that, there's no way we can go and rip the guts out of the planet and rape and pillage the way that's happening. It changes us. So it's important. So that any of those experiences where we can expose ourselves or others to those qualities of reverence and sacredness that are inherent in different areas of nature, it then has the possibility of changing how people relate with nature. And so a lot of the imbalances that we have on the planet at the moment come from an imbalance in our sense of relationship with the planet. And the very, very simplistic example I like to kind of use with that is almost like the example of an adult with a child. Like when you're a parent and you have a child, you just love your child unconditionally, regardless of what they do and how they are. You still love them. And that's, as the child grows up, it goes, in teenage years, it often becomes quite selfish and self-involved in all those sorts of things, and forgets what's being offered by the parent, by the adults around. And so they can become, quite selfish in a lot of ways. And then eventually, as the child kind of matures a bit and they realize what the parent was offering and had offered, there's that sense of, oh my God, like I've been such an asshole, or I've taken so much for granted. And that sense of humility comes back, and that experience of appreciation and gratitude for what was offered. And the child says to the adult, thank you, I get it, I'm really sorry. Thank you for all you give. And when it comes with gratitude and appreciation, it harmonizes the imbalance in the relationship. And it's almost like that's what's missing with humanity and the planet at the moment. You have a relationship with a friend and you give a lot and you give a lot, and the friend takes and takes and takes. And then one day the friend wakes up and says, oh my God, I'm really sorry. Thank you for all you've given. It harmonizes that relationship. You feel energetically, it becomes rebalanced. That's a bit how it is with the planet and humanity at the moment. So any of those acknowledgements and recognitions and realizations of how much the planet offers, which Indigenous cultures just inherently knew, that we've kind of moved away from because Western cultures they've translocated to different places, so they haven't been in the same place for so long. So they haven't kind of developed that sense of respect and wonder and recognition of what the planet provides. Plus also we've lost contact with that because, milk comes in a carton or from the other side of the planet. Those sorts of things. So we've lost our connection to the land and how it provides sustenance for us because of the global economy. So it's nice to get back to basics. So the simple act of growing a lettuce or a tomato plant, getting your hand in the dirt, can help re-establish some of those relationships, that sense of gratitude and wonder of what nature provides. Belinda was talking about, you go and sit in the same place for a period of time, and it changes you, it does. You go and sit in the same place for a while, and actually over the seasons, different plants self-seed. And they're actually medicine you can use. Because, like I've lived in places for long periods of time that have often got lots of introduced weed seeds around. I've noticed they go and sit in the one spot for a while, and it's different medicinal plants that we see as weeds self-seed. They're actually responding to me. And they do it for humans all the time, but humans we don't see it. But nature is constantly attempting to relate with us. So it's like when you walk around and you relate with nature, trees, plants, insects, animals, it's like sometimes they go, oh my God, we've got a live one. It's like and they don't relate in English, they relate in feeling. And you can sit quietly with them for periods of time and have the most wonderful experiences and conversations. Part of the reason why I work the way I do with plants at home in the clinic at home is that sometimes with the ones that I can do it with, I take them for a walk out in the garden to see which plants want to work with the person. And we pick those plants. because they do, they communicate.